Hello and welcome everyone to a continuation of my conversation with John Lash. Part one we did yesterday. It wasn't our intent to do more than one part, but there is just so much to this story that needs to be told. And please don't start with part two. Whether you're familiar with the Sophianic myth or not, yesterday's discussion, John has shared that it was one of the clearest and most concise tellings of the story in its totality. So even if you've heard bits and pieces of it before, yesterday is a beautiful telling of this Sophianic myth. And I highly recommend you go and start there. So welcome, John, for our second day in a row.
Well, thanks. It's good to be back. It's midnight here, or actually 12:30 to be exact. So I'm a night owl, so I don't mind being up. I'll go out and look at the sky later on.
Oh, good. Well, I appreciate you being up in the middle of the night for me. Now, yesterday was an incredible conversation, and it was a beautiful story to listen to. And before we move on from it, a couple of questions have come up for me.
Sure.
You very eloquently and deliberately shared the difference between the archons and what we call psychopathic humans. The two are very, very different, and they are not one and the same, and the words should not be used interchangeably. However, as you know, out there in the sort of general public arena, what we refer to as the elite, the Illuminati, the cabal, the ruling powers of this planet are firstly considered psychopaths, but also often referred to as the archons, or at least manipulated by them. So if you could go into a little bit about the relationship, if there is one, in your opinion, between the archons and psychopathic humans.
That's a great opening question. I would say that the understanding of that question, exploration of that question, and reaching some insight about it is absolutely crucial to human survival, certainly. So I'll do my best to bring some clarity to the subject, perhaps even some lucidity. The first thing that I would have you note is the source materials again. When I introduced the word Archon into the discourse about 12 years ago, I did it in the framework and context of the surviving Gnostic source materials. And as I've said before, I consider it very important to stick closely to these materials and not just speculate and fabulate wildly with the term Archon. Okay? However, there is a problem even in the materials, in a sense, because in the materials where the word Archon appears, it has a kind of ambiguous or double meaning as well. On the one hand, it refers to that particular inorganic extraterrestrial species that was created by the splash effect of the Aeon Sophia in the third galactic limb, okay? It does refer specifically, let's say definition one, refers specifically to that cybernetic species, which is an inorganic species consisting of a large number, millions and billions of drone archons who are of the gray ET type, and a number of overlord or ruler archons, managerial archons who are of the reptilian type. And both the gray ET and the reptilian types are indicated in the Gnostic sources, okay? So that's pretty remarkable that you can go back to that material, which is 1,600 years old and comes from investigations of many, many centuries, if not millennia before that, and find that these visionary seers have identified these mind parasites in the outer reaches of the solar system. The other thing to bear in mind to help clarify this question is the derivation of the word archon. It comes from a Greek word archai, A-R-C-H-A-I, which is a root, which means from the beginnings. Now, why does the word archon come from that root? Well, simply because of what the narrative tells us. I emphasize again that every time a question comes up from considering the narrative, if you stay in narrative, the answer to the question can be found. And the fact is simple. They are called those who came from the beginning because they were there at the beginning of the solar system before the Earth was formed. So there were archons and there was a solar system before Sophia herself morphed into the planet Earth. The story is very clear about that. Okay, so that takes care of, like, say, the hard line definition, clear definition of the archons as an alien species, but at the same time, in some bizarre way, kind of akin to humanity, you know?
Do you have...
In fact, there's a...
Sorry,
Yeah,
do you have anything else running on your computer? Because it's... you're
making
cutting
no
out a little...
noise?
You're cutting out a little bit. I mean, I'm catching every word, but you're a little bit robotic.
All the other programs are closed.
And you sound better already.
Okay,
Yes.
so where do we pick up? Talking about the archons.
And definition one.
Yeah, so we complete definition one. Now we come to the fact that is noted by many scholars is that the word archon simply meant governor back in those days. So there was a governor of Jerusalem, he was called the Archon. And the translators, standard scholars, translate the word archon as ruler or authority. So the second meaning, which becomes ambiguous now, is that it can also refer to anyone in the role of a ruler or authority. So by that definition, you could fast forward to the modern times, and you can say those psychopaths who are in positions of influence and power, the heads of government,
can rightly be called
the heads
archons.
of banks, can rightly be called archons in the sense that they are ruler authorities, but not in the sense that they are a human embodiment of the non-human extraterrestrial archon.
Okay, well, that's clear in terms of definition of the word, but what about a relationship between the two and behavior?
Yeah. The relationship between them, I would venture to say this now to you at this point. I wouldn't have said this 10 years ago or even 5 years ago. The relationship is that they are convergent. It is getting to the point where the human psychopaths, that is to say they're human animals born out of a woman's body, they come from between the legs of a woman, as all human beings do, okay?
Yeah.
Those psychopaths are converging behaviorally and mentally with the extraterrestrial. They're blending to the point where I would say they are becoming really indistinguishable.
Is that because of a proactive action on the part of the archons to make that connection and that convergence?
Exactly. I like the way you think, by the way. Exactly. One thing I've often said is that take the cue from the story. The archons operate on envy. Well, envy means you don't just want what someone else has, you want to destroy what they have.
If you can't
because
have it.
you can't have it.
Yeah.
Right. So the archons would like to be like us, but they can't because they can't live in the atmosphere of the Earth because the Earth is an organic planet, and they are repelled by the living composition of the atmosphere. They are repelled particularly by oxygen, which is toxic to their systems after a long period of exposure, that is to say, just some few hours. So they can't become like us and they can't live on Earth. So what they want to do is to have us become like them. And you're damn right they're proactive about it. They are transmitting to humanity telepathically and using the means at their disposal, and they are highly skillful in their own right, to turn human beings into them. That is to say, to produce totally archontified human beings. Now, the normal human animal who has empathy, who feels something for the life of all species, who feels some connection to the mother planet, has an immunity to that approach of the archons. But psychopaths like that approach. Psychopaths like to be turned into archontic agents, you see?
Yeah.
And that is actually what is happening. And I think we've reached a point now where I would safely say, that the psychopaths running around on this planet and creating murder and mayhem are almost totally possessed by archons.
So I mean, maybe it's a chicken or the egg kind of question, but
Sure.
is psychopathy? I mean, yesterday you were pretty clear that it's inherent within human nature, or the
Right.
result of the birthing process, in fact.
That's right.
But I'm wondering whether or not there is an opportunity here to look at whether the psychopathy in the first place is actually the result of archontic action from way back, which produced psychopathy in humans, which made them more susceptible to their actions, and it sort of became an expanding and ever revolving cycle.
Sure. You're talking about a kind of complementarity. You see, I would say that there are two dispositions. There's a disposition in some human animals, it's due to birth trauma, that produces psychopaths. Now, that's just my theory, by the way, and I don't pretend to be an authority, if you'll allow the illusion.
Mm-hmm.
I don't pretend to be an authority on the subject, but I've thought about it a lot, and I'm convinced, let's just say John Lash thinks, for what it's worth, that there is a purely human condition wherein birth trauma produces a disposition toward psychopathy, and that's how we have a small percentage of psychopaths in the human family. At the same time, the archons transmitting from outer space, using telepathy, using their techniques of simulation, using religion, which is what they use massively, because they implanted religion in the human brain. It's like an implant. Using that, they are inducing all the conditions on this planet which are unnatural, by which that disposition to psychopathy can thrive and reach its highest power. So that's how I would describe it. There is definitely a complementation or collaboration between the archons working from without and the human disposition toward psychopathy. Is that clear?
Yes. Okay.
Good.
The other question that came out from yesterday's discussion for me, before moving on, is, so we've had humanity, Anthropos 10 mentioned. We've had
Right.
greys and reptilians mentioned. So where does that leave Palladians and Arcturians and Lyrians, and who are they? Where do they come from, and where do they fit into all of this?
They come out of New Age make-believe and pretending and fantasies. And they come out of the minds of people who want to be special and want to be regarded as someone who has esoteric knowledge or can read intel from higher planes. It's fantasy material.
Well, through some of the contacts that I have that are in the military, and that contacts of my contacts, these apparent ETs are walking the halls of the Pentagon and the White House, and are very much involved in a lot of the black ops technologies and things. So according to very high-placed military personnel, these people exist. These beings exist.
Yes, I know, but that's like talking to an inmate in an insane asylum to get information about the asylum. You know, C.G. Jung, Jung,
Mm-hmm.
was quite a famous psychologist, known worldwide, kind of viewed as a guru. Well, when C.G. Jung was at the Bergosli Clinic in Zurich in the early part of the 20th century, around 1905, 1910, he was an up-and-coming psychologist. He followed the lead of his mentor, who was the director of the clinic. And his mentor, I forget his name at the moment, had always recommended to the psychiatrist that they not take a cold clinical attitude toward the people. And this is a asylum, this is like people are crackers in this place, right?
Yeah.
Some are violent, some are not. But Jung's mentor said, well, have empathy for them and go talk to them, and listen to what they say, like you would listen to any intelligent person. So Jung went and did that, and he got a lot of material for his own work from listening to these insane people, but he didn't necessarily turn around and consider that what they were telling him was factually true. Now, I have another comment on that situation that you describe coming from military intel, which I would like to make, which is rather more brutal, if I might be so brutal.
By all means.
Okay, it's my understanding, and this has been confirmed by many sober people who have looked at the UFO phenomenon, that when the ET UFO phenomenon emerged into its present definition around 1947, after the sighting in Washington, forget these things now. I used to know all these things by heart because I did a lot of UFO research before I wrote Not in His Image. Anyway, the Kenneth Arnold sighting, Mount Rainier, all that, 1947, okay. It's widely understood by many researchers that the ET UFO phenomenon was created as cover for American military secret operations. Have you heard that explanation?
I have, but then what discounts that is the imagery of UFOs, of strange things in the sky that are in paintings.
What do you mean, the photographs?
No, I'm talking about paintings that are hundreds and hundreds of years old.
Right. Well, I'm not saying that there is not, within all of that so-called evidence, or within all of those accounts, and some of them do go way, way back, they go back to Egyptian times. I believe the first recorded account of a UFO comes from an Egyptian papyrus of about 1400 BC, the papyrus of Pepi, right? Okay. The archons can construct and navigate ET hardware.
Right.
They can use various kinds of flying saucers. And so it's certainly conceivable, I totally accept, that some accounts of UFO, I'm calling it hardware, the flying machines, are actually accounts of vessels, okay?
Mm-hmm.
But the great majority of the UFO phenomenon, and it's vast, as you know, the research, the files, the documents, the photographs, covers millions and millions of pages. I'm of the opinion that the great majority of it, especially coming from the military, is a fraud to cover up what the military themselves are doing. All right?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, this is what happens with the human mind. Let me tell you how it works. Let me tell you how insanity works. The three-letter covert operations of the American government and other governments create a cover story for their own activities. But the cover story is a psychotic fiction that operates in their minds like a beetle burrowing into their brains. And eventually, it doesn't take too long, over a generation or two, the people who are involved in propagating that psychotic fiction to cover up what they are doing can't tell that it's a fiction anymore. And they're walking around in a living nightmare. And they're walking up and down the halls of the White House actually believing the products of their own imagination. It doesn't matter how many extraterrestrial species there are wandering around here. One is enough to take us down. And one is clearly taking us down. And the Gnostics warned about that. So since we have the clearest warning about this one predatory species, I say, let's concentrate on that intel and see what we can do about it.
Did the Gnostics also go into how they dealt with this presence on the planet?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Oh, absolutely. There is a, if you go to metahistory.org, you'll see on the home page, on the right-hand column, link to the Nag Hammadi commentaries. So I have written some commentaries on the Nag Hammadi books. There are about 52 documents in the collection. Not all of them are important. And I haven't completed that commentary or guide. It's half done. But one of the commentaries that I have finished is on the Gospel of Philip. So if you go and look that up, you'll see it contains some information on how the Gnostics dealt with repelling the archons. There is also a text on metahistory.org. If you go to the site guide and you scroll down to the section called the Archon Files, you'll find there's a text called the Gnostic Catechism. And this text, I think it's the second apocalypse of James, actually describes archonic beings who abduct souls by night. Okay, there you have it. In that textual document, 1600 years old, a description of UFO, ET abductions. And it describes how they appear sometimes in pairs, sometimes in three, and how they paralyze the witness. And it describes how to answer them, how to talk to them in order to repel them. So primarily there are two ways that I described to handle archonic intrusions of that type. Okay? The first way, which is in the Gnostic Catechism, is that you talk to them face to face. You overcome the fear. They have an ability to paralyze people with fear. Do you know how they do that?
No.
By radio frequencies directly into your brain. When you look into the eyes of a gray archon, you're not looking into the eyes of an organic being. You're looking into the eyes of a machine clone, a cyborg. And behind those, look at those big black eyes. Everyone knows what they look like, right?
Yeah.
Remember Whitley Strieber or Whitley Strieber? Remember that?
Yes,
the big thing, the big revelation. Picture of the bug-eyed alien on the front of his book. Okay? Everyone knows what those big black eyes look like. Well, those big black eyes are simply like plastic lenses. They're not eyes. And behind those black plastic lenses is a radio transmission nodules. And they emanate through their eyes a radio wave that cuts into your normal brain frequencies and stuns you. That's why people are stunned when they have the momentary visit of these entities who have to dart in and out of the atmosphere rather quickly because they can't be in the atmosphere of the Earth very long. So if you can overcome that fear, overcome that stunning effect, you talk to them. And the Gnostic text I'm citing, the second apocalypse of James, tells you exactly what to say, and it's absolutely beautiful. It says you tell them, look, I recognize who you are and that you are from the same mother, but you are not my kin. Now you can understand that if you listen to the previous 2 hours, right?
Absolutely, yes.
She produced the archons. I dearly wish that the people who use this term, which I've made available, would mention that little detail. It's little, teeny little detail. She produced the archons. So you say to them, I recognize that we are of the same mother, but we are not kin because we are of a heavenly origin. Again, what does the story say? The human genome was created inside the galactic core. The archons arose outside the core in the galactic limbs. This is speaking truth to power.
You know, you've just reminded me as a side note of the one and only time I've felt their presence. And I'll just briefly tell you because it's kind of funny. I went to bed. I was still wide awake. I'd just gotten into bed, closed my eyes, and just felt the room was full, just full. And so I sat there with my eyes, laid there with my eyes closed, and took a deep breath and just blasted my own sort of inner light out. And had never done it before, so I had no idea what to expect. But what happened was my inner vision, with my eyes closed, just lit up. And I saw probably 20 little faces. The room was full. And they looked so shocked and so stunned that I'd seen them, because they knew I'd seen them. They reminded me of small children who were just being caught with their hand in the cookie jar. and that
Yeah.
whole, oh shit, mum just caught us and there's no way of getting out of this one. That I laughed. I just laughed, and I genuinely laughed because they just had such a childlike quality to them. And as soon as I laughed, they disappeared. And the whole thing was over in a matter of seconds. But anyway, very childlike.
Sounds plausible to me. In fact, it relates closely to the second form of defense, which I'm going to come to in a moment.
Okay.
So just to conclude here, the first form of defense is know her story and know who they are. And when you encounter them, tell them that you know who they are. That's all. And dismiss them. Tell them that you choose to have nothing to do with them. And you dismiss them. The power of the story itself, according to the Gnostics, is so great that if you speak truth to this alien power, you will disarm it entirely. So that's one of the ways they advise to deal with archonic intrusions.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about the direct, when they slip into our dimension momentarily, or when they make a virtual reality projection into our dimension, which is more often. They're not really there. They appear as a holographic duplicate of themselves. They're brilliant at doing this. So the second thing they said is even more explicit. On metahistory.org, there's an article under the Archon files called Kundalini and the Alien Force. This article draws on material in the Gospel of Philip and a couple of other Gnostic writings. And it explains very simply that Gnostics considered that a healthy, high, erotic sexual vibration repels the archons. Now, one of the reasons why there has been a massive occurrence of ET abductions and ET encounters all around the world for the last 40 or 50 years is because of the decline of human sexuality.
And the perversion and distortion of it as well.
Perversion and distortion and degeneration and a general weakening of what I would call the sexual energy of the human animal. We are sexy creatures, human animals. We can do a lot of things with sex. The reproducing being the very least of them, as far as I'm concerned. And this sexual energy, as Wilhelm Reich taught, she called it orgastic energy or orgone energy, bioelectrical energy of the human body, not only has erotic properties, so it can give us enormous pleasure when we do these acts of sexuality, but it has immunological properties that are equally potent. So the best immunity against archons is to be, turned on, to be hot, to be alive and awake in your sexuality, and to have a healthy, strong, and sane sexual life. But in addition to that, it gets even better. Philip refers to rituals, particularly, we would call them today tantric sex rituals, particularly the ritual of the nymphion. Nymphpion. It's like the word nymph.
Or nymphomaniac.
Okay? Nymphomania. Yeah? It's good to be nymphomaniac. Nymphion is a special term in the Gnostic writings, which has been translated by the scholars as bridal chamber. So the Gnostics say, you enter the bridal chamber, you man and woman, you unite in the bridal chamber, and you produce and clothe yourself in light.
Light?
What do you think of that? Light.
Oh, light.
L-I-G-H-T. Luminosity. Light. I have to say it with an Australian accent. Light.
Light.
Okay. Clothe yourself with light. And so I translate nymphion as the tantric cell. So when a man and a woman get together and they generate a high frequency of erotic pleasure, it produces luminosity. This is an actual physical fact. That luminosity can be measured. It's the bioluminosity of the ribosomes in the cellular basis of the human body. You basically become radiant, streamingly radiant with luminosity in high sexual excitation. Do you know that? That can happen.
Yes, I do know that.
And apparently, the Gnostics, not apparently, I can assure you, this is true, practiced a kind of high tantric rite, what they called entering the nymphion, or the bridal chamber. So basically, they joined and formed a single cell, like an egg, a luminous egg, surrounding the couple, the Shiva Shakti, and they generated enormous luminosity which repels the archons in all directions of the universe.
Did they also make reference to the psychopaths then, and the different and hang on, how do I place this? Presumably they made the distinction, which is why you've made the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Were they in a process back then of trying to either re-educate, heal, or eliminate psychopaths?
Oh, they most certainly were. In fact, they were at a very critical stage of their education of the human race. You see, the Telestai, as I call them, as they call themselves, means we who are aimed. Okay, the Telestai. They didn't call themselves Gnostics. Among themselves, they didn't use the term Gnostikos, Gnostikoi. It was an insult directed to them by their enemies. It really was meant to be smartass or know-it-all. Did you know that?
No.
Yeah. Gnostics didn't call themselves Gnostics in their own time and setting. It came into popular usage as an insult, meaning know-it-all or smartass.
Interesting.
They called themselves, yeah, isn't it? They call themselves Telestai, singular telestis, which comes from the Greek word telos, meaning aim, purpose, or objective. So it means, well, we who are aimed. So they were aimed, they had a purpose, they had an objective, they had a mission. And this mission was carried by generations of Gnostics through their school system of the mysteries. The mysteries were the schools of the Gnostics. They were not incubation tanks for the Illuminati. There were no Illuminati, so-called ancient Illuminati, in the mysteries. The mysteries, the pagan mysteries, were completely devoted to the divine goddess Sophia and to the education of the human race to bring it to a genius level. And anyone who tells you and goes back and says, oh, the pagan mysteries were the seed of Satanism and they were the origin of the Illuminati today, is completely wrong. and that claim cannot be supported by historical, archaeological, or textual evidence of any kind.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to understand that the mysteries were mystery schools, and in these mystery schools, the Telestae were dedicated to the human race, to the education of the human race. Now, when it came down to the time that Christianity began to arise about 2,000 years ago, they were at a critical stage in educating the human race. They faced a huge challenge. Because that time, through the Judaic religion, which is behind Christianity, they saw a disturbing development in the pagan classical world. They saw the concept of the Messiah coming forth like a meme, like a paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
and really affecting people. Now, there is no Messiah in pagan religion and pagan philosophy. It is totally a product of the Judeo-Christian Islamic mentality. So they said, whoops, this Messiah concept, which is coming out of Palestine, first from the Jews, then it gets adapted by the Christians. Well, man, this thing is getting very big. People are going for this. They're going for the salvationist agenda. And this is really dangerous. We got the rise of the salvationist agenda, which consists of 4 components. It's always important to know explicitly what these 4 components are. One is the creation of the world by a father God, a male creator who has no female counterpart. That's a lie. 2, the selection of a chosen people to carry forth the mission of the father God. That's a hideous lie. 3, the coming of the Messiah sent by Father God, who is going to perform some magic upon the world and help the chosen people achieve their role. Another hideous lie. And 4th, Judgment Day in the Apocalypse, when the whole scenario wraps up into a horrific holocaust of the human race. That's the salvationist agenda. They saw that agenda emerge. They watched it emerge over centuries. And when it got to the point where Christianity really started to take off, mainly in the slave population of the Roman Empire, they said, hold on, crackers. We got to do something about this. And they pondered the problem very closely. I wrote about this in Not in His Image in some detail. And they came up with a tentative solution. They said, well, we really have to take our knowledge of the Anthropos, which is very esoteric, our knowledge of the origin of the human race in the galactic center, our knowledge of how Sophia and Thelete designed humanity, and we have to take this precious intel, which belongs to the Gnostic mystery schools, and make it public. Because it wasn't public at that time. It was known in the mystery schools, and then the people in the schools went out and taught and directed and guided, the masses, but it wasn't taught to masses directly. Did you know that?
To some degree, yeah.
Yeah. It's an important fact that the mysteries were closed societies, not because they had the desire to keep secrets like the CIA today, but because they wanted to preserve the sanctity and purity of the Sophianic narrative by tightly transmitting it within their cells. And then those who were inspired and guided and aimed by the Sophianic narrative could bring that wisdom to bear on external matters. Do you see the reasoning of their system?
Yes.
Okay, but they realized when Christianity arose and this pathological, psychopathic concept of the Messiah began to take hold in people's minds, the Telestae realized there was an emergency situation. So they said, okay, well, how are we going to do this? Because what it really means is that we need to teach and show humanity the true image of itself. We know what the Anthropos is. We know who the Anthropos is and how it was created. We know that whole story. But the mass of people do not have what you might call a generic concept of their own humanity. And they need this in order to fight against this pathological system of the Messiah complex. Because the Messiah complex pretends to hold up an image of the perfect humanity, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Christ, the perfect humanity, the Son of God, or the Jewish Messiah, the highest of the just, of the Zaddik concept of righteousness. So this non-human and anti-human ideal of the righteous Messiah, the Son of God, is a thick mythology. And the Gnostics said, well, in order to give people the ability to resist that, we have to give them an option. Therefore, we have to go out and teach publicly what is the true image of humanity and the Anthropos. And they prepared and started to do that in the first centuries of the Christian era. And by the year 415, when Hypatia was murdered in the streets of Alexandria, go check it out. It's the opening chapter of my book.
Okay.
They were entirely suppressed and obliterated. Schools were closed, their schools were wiped out, their libraries were burned, millions and millions of scrolls and papyrus were burned, their teachers were persecuted, murdered, and the Christian fanatics of that time, who were driven by this messianic syndrome, believing that they could act in the name of the Creator God against these evil pagans, did everything they could over centuries movement and to prevent humanity from knowing the Sophianic vision story that I recounted yesterday. So they were working on something, and they didn't have a chance to carry it forth into the world. They were wiped out before they could do so, and we have inherited that problem.
Yes, we have.
Haven't we?
And it's interesting.
Go stand before any person. Yeah. Just let me say this, Lisa. I ask you and listeners, go stand before any person that you know you consider to be an intelligent and sensible human being. Ask them, what is a generic image of humanity? And it'd be interesting how they would answer it.
A generic image?
Yeah. What is your generic image of humanity?
Even without a religious background. My joke is that Jesus and God were mentioned all the time in my house, but it was because somebody was always swearing. That, Christ and perhaps Mother Mary, the personification of the ideal human.
That's right. And that is horrible. And look at what it's done.
Look at what it's done.
Look at what it's done. It's horrible. The image of Christ as an ideal human is one of the worst toxic syndromes that has ever infected the human mind.
I don't know if you're aware of Robert Morningsky and his work.
No.
But you talked about the fact that it's a goddess, a female, that is the mother of our species, and he, in conjunction with what he calls the Sensei elders, which is what I understand, a group of elders from all over the planet. They're not a particular culture or nation or race. That humanity at its origins was in fact all female. That the male is actually a deformed female. The Y chromosome is a deformed X. And he's got some amazing material on the subject. So I don't know if what
are his sources?
The Sensei elders.
Oh, so these are living people who told him this.
This is, yes, this is living people who have had somewhat of their own mystery school passed down for many, 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 many
Oh,
years.
really? What are their
Mhm.
sources? What are the sources of the sensei?
I don't know. I don't know. And
Okay,
like I said, they're global. It's not a
right.
it's not a particular tribe or race. And you
Well,
might.
what he says, that paraphrase you just gave could be regarded as a kind of refraction, a refraction of a fragment of the Sophianic narrative.
Mm.
Because it is true, and I've said this many times, that something occurred. There's a fourth event that occurred in the narrative that I didn't mention yesterday.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
But first I want you to visualize something. You know what gauze is? Like gauze bandage.
Hmm.
Is there another word for it in Australian? We call
No,
it
we
gauze.
use it gauze. We call it gauze.
Yeah. It's also like cheesecloth, right? It's used for making cheese.
Yes.
Okay. Imagine in front of you there is something like a constellation of stars, three-dimensional, in front of you, and that it forms some kind of geometric structure, not a regular structure, but sort of like some kind of crystal structure defined by these star points,
Okay.
just hanging in front of you in space. Okay. Then imagine that there's a kind of that's enclosed in kind of a cloud.
Mm-hmm.
That is a way of picturing the Orion Nebula, M42. It's a cloud, a nebula, a luminous cloud, and in it there are star formations, particularly this formation called the trapezium. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Now visualize in this image that you have in front of your eyes that there are strips of gauze hung between the stars and between the points of this this construct, kind of
Mm-hmm.
like a mobile. There are strips of gauze hanging there. That's a way to picture the deposit of the Anthropos plasm in the Orion Nebula. It's vast, huge. It consists of massive filaments of mycelium-like gauze spread across billions of light years between the stars in the nebula. It's like immense. This is the plasm from which your DNA is extracted, according to the Gnostic vision. So, can you picture that and hold that in your mind for a moment?
Yes.
All right, now comes the other spectacular anomaly in this story. Let's go back to the moment when Sophia had conferred upon the archons the impression that they were intelligent enough to construct a habitat for themselves. So she gave them a flash of her own eonic consciousness, and they created a kind of like a Rector set solar system, and they began to inhabit that solar system, and they sort of got out of our way from that was her purpose in doing that. Well, at that moment, she is rapidly, dramatically morphing and materializing into a planet. I mean, this is a tremendous thing for an Aeon to do. Aeons don't do that normally.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and she's a young Aeon. Here she is outside the pleroma in the third galactic arm, subjected to all these conditions. First of all, she has mass. You know, Aeons have no mass. How does she deal with all the mass that she's taking on? She starts to take on all the elementary particles, as it were, that are going to build into the natural elements of a planet. And she's going through a tremendous shock at the time that this is happening. I mean, you can go to this scenario as
I can
far as you
imagine she
want
would have
to.
been terrified, actually.
Yeah, well, the description that's given in the writings of Irenaeus say that she felt terror and fear and grief and many, many powerful emotions, and that these emotions themselves materialized into the elements of the planet that she was becoming. I mean, picture this, you know. But something also happened. Remember that all this occurred, all this activity occurred, but Sophia was in proximity to the Orion Nebula. She was in proximity to the Anthropos plasm that had been generated from the galactic core. And as she began to spin as a planet, she took on a planetary spin. As she began to behave as a planet, she actually really had to surrender to becoming a planet. She lost control. She lost the control and autonomy that she would have had as a galactic star goddess. And in that panic, if you can imagine someone spinning and groping as she turns and as she's morphing into something else, she plunged in the direction of the Orion Nebula and swept past it, and she sheared away part of the gauze. And as a result, part of the genomic plasm that was deposited there got incorporated into the material body of the Earth. Okay? This is called the shearing of the template, the Anthropos template. It's also called, in other mythologies, in other mythological references outside Gnosticism, the separation of the sexes. Because the part of the template that she accidentally sheared and tore off so that it wound into the planetary formation consisted only of the female part of the genome. Okay, this is a big story. This is a big event. Now, what you need to try to understand, if I might use that language, is what was the consequence of that event? Well, it goes back to what you just said in the report of this man. What's his name?
Robert Morning Sky.
Yeah. As a result of that, when the Earth turned into the Earth and it began to develop and evolve into a habitable planetary habitat, a hospitable habitat for human life, the seeds of the female part of the species were already present in the atmosphere, and so the first human beings on Earth were exclusively women. I've said this many, many times, but I say it always in the context of the narrative, just like I just did.
Wow, because I had never heard it outside of Robert's material in such a way. That's amazing.
Yeah, I've written about it extensively on metahistory.org. It's called The Gender Rift, RIFT. The consequences of it are very vast. The consequences of it are still being lived out right now. We're living out the final consequences of that rifting, of that tearing of the template. So at first there were only women on this planet. The men came later. Okay.
I'm currently reading his latest book too, so which is very, very good. But back to this.
Okay.
You talked yesterday about us being Anthropos 10.
Right.
And apparently we are morphing into Anthropos 11 as part of the correction.
That's right, exactly.
So can you just elaborate a little bit on what Anthropos 11 is, what you foresee it will look like, is it a simple, organic, passive, evolutionary process that we're along for the ride in, or do we have to play an active part?
We have to play a very active part. It is a shared mutation.
Mm-hmm.
You see, the Aeon Sophia, to use the reverential term, you can also call her Pam, P-A-M, the planetary animal mother. Okay, I'll call her Pam.
Yeah, nice.
I like that term. Yeah. Pam is in one amazing situation in correction. Because now that she's coming through to interactivity with the human animals, with the Anthropos, with humanity, she's on the course of achieving her correction. Well, what she finds is that she's in the heart of the experiment that she conceived in the beginning, so she can correct the experiment from within. Now remember, that isn't that fantastic? The Aeons and Sophia and Thelete, previous to her plunge, had observed from the observation booth of the Pleromic core 9 generations, 9 experiments involving the human species, 9 versions of humanity on planetary systems in this galaxy. And they observed those, and they failed for various reasons, because we were not able to harmonize and master our capacities, because they had dosed us very strongly. I keep emphasizing that point because it's so important. Okay? If you have a question about, what I mean by that, well, ask me. So anyway, when Sophia was in the Pleroma, get this, when Pam was in the Pleroma back at home base, and she saw these experiments go wrong with her darling species, she couldn't do anything about it because she was in the Pleroma.
Yeah.
And Aeons normally do not go out of the Pleroma unless they choose what is called, oh, you're going to love this, the technique of avataric descent.
Ooh, yes, I do love that.
Yeah, don't you love that? The technique of our avataric descent. So it is known, not so much on the basis of the Gnostic sources, although the Gnostics certainly knew this, but it can be verified on the basis of other sources in world mythology, that this idea of avataric descent is known to the human mind and has been known to seers and enlightened and illumined people through the centuries. And what is avataric descent? Well, in terms of the Sophianic narrative, it means that if there is an Aeon in the Pleroma who generates a plasm that is projected outside and then it develops into some planetary world, the Aeon who is overseeing that experiment has the option to make an avataric descent and intervention into the experience, into the experiment from the Pleroma. This can be done. And in fact, 10 avatars of Vishnu describes this kind of process.
But they would they be leaving the Pleroma completely or simply projecting?
No, they would. They would be creating like a holographic projection of themselves. So what you see in the Hindu myth of the 10 incarnations of Vishnu is the 10 avatars of Vishnu, that Vishnu appears, and he's an Aeon. He appears as a holographic projection within these planetary scenarios. Now, let's get back to our darling mother, Pam. Well, see, Pam was young, and they called her Prunikos, which is a beautiful word from the Gnostic text. And it means outrageous or audacious. Audacious.
Oh, back to Robert Morningsky. He would call her a woman of fire.
Yeah, audacious. She's very audacious. But even though she was audacious, she's a young Aeon. And as a young Aeon, she did not know how to master the technique of avataric descent. So needless to say, that added greatly to her anguish when she watched these 9 experiments go off the rails.
Right.
But now it's a totally different situation. She doesn't have to practice avataric descent because she's already in the experiment at the ground level. And she is bringing forth mutation of Anthropos 10 into Anthropos 11 with the direct collaboration and assistance of those members of the human species who might like to go along on that little adventure.
And do you know what Anthropos 11 looks like? And is it done in a generation? Is it done over hundreds of years? You gave a time frame yesterday, and I can't quite remember what it was. You said a second of her time is
108 days.
108 days
of your life.
That's not long. And it's going.
No, but it's a pretty big second. She does it in the last 11 minutes of the kalpa on her time. So the kalpa is the cosmic period of time measured by the precession of the equinoxes. Okay, this is an astronomical fact. This is not a New Age fantasy. And it's 25,920 years, or 26,000 years roughly. That's the length of the kalpa. 26,000 years is one day to her. So the last 11 minutes of that day are about 216 years to her. So this mutation of Anthropos 11, which she has begun this year, 2014, extends into the year 2216, which is 11 minutes of her time.
Now, this began in March, I believe, as you've written.
Right. Her correction began in March after a period of 3 years in which we reset the experiment.
So you were tracking, you talked yesterday that you were tracking her reset since 2011. So what happened in March that let you know that the correction had begun?
What happened in March 2011 was that there was an astronomical event witnessed by the eyes of the entire world. It was called the supermoon.
This year.
Oh, 2014.
Mm.
What happened in 2014 was that the process of reset that began in 2011 with the supermoon was completed in 10 seconds of her time, which is 3 years exactly. So I knew from following the sky writing and from following the astronomical events of correction, I concluded that it would only take 3 years for her to reset the experiment, and that from March onward, we could anticipate seeing the proof that correction was underway.
Apart from astronomical.
Astronomical. Yes, right.
How can we identify? Now, I've talked to a lot of people lately who are all saying that something similar in the sense of whether it's Alfred Weber saying we've changed timelines, we're now on a positive timeline, whether it's a woman called Lily Earth who says we are now on plan A, which was the archontic plan, is done, and we're now on humanity's plan and the planet's plan. They're just two examples, but and then yours, of course, that we're in Sophia's correction. So how can people identify world events? Because, and how can I put this? We're in a very confusing time where everybody is suspicious of everything that goes on, and seeing it as the next step in the Illuminati plan for world domination, control, and a new world order.
Sure.
So everything gets accredited to that. But at the same time, if we have shifted timelines, if we are in Sophia's correction, then we're going to see these outward changes. And how do we differentiate between what is the next step in their plan and what is hers?
Well, that's a beautiful question. I like that a lot. And I think I could answer that question in 2 parts.
Okay.
The first part says, what does it take to observe and verify that Sophia's correction is indeed happening and that there is a chance now for humanity to completely turn this whole planet around? What does it take? Well, obviously, you cite a couple of people, and I'm sure we could cite 50 more. Mm. A lot of human animals are getting the sense that this is happening.
Yep.
Now, I appear to be the one human animal in that crew or crowd or gang who is relating it back to the sacred narrative, okay? Which I consider to be very important. And if I may say so, I do distinguish myself in that way. Nonetheless, I recognize that this is an event that belongs to humanity. Obviously, many people are going to be sensing it. But the ability to detect how correction occurs is a high art. It's not speculation or wishful thinking. It's a high art of observation. So that's the first thing that is required, is to learn the art of observation, and particularly to observe subtle things. The second part of the question, that's a difficult answer, I know. The second part of the question is probably easier. I think it'll go down a little bit easier. When I completed the GNE in March of this year, I addressed this question directly. Lisa, I addressed the question that you just asked. How are we going to know that correction is underway? What is the proof? What is the evidence? And I managed to boil it down into one simple phrase. I said, well, just look at the events in the world. Any event that you hear about on the mainstream news, any event that you hear about through the alternative media, or that happens locally in your own world, and ask yourself this question. Is this event unfolding in a way that gives the advantage to truth? Or is it simply unfolding in a continuing psychodrama of deception and confusion? Now, if you can make that distinction, then you can begin to track her correction.
The answer right now, for me,
Yeah.
is that it's muddy, because there are.
That's
you
right.
you can say it's both. There is every event, everything honestly gets scrutinized by the alternative and awake population, and is often outed for the false flag or for the whatever that it is. However, so it doesn't take hold in the minds of that segment of the population, but the mainstream media, of course, still does its best to create all of those things that you're talking about, the fear and the deception and the fraud. So it's still very much half and half right now, but I guess that's going to get clearer.
Well, it gets clearer really to the art that I'm talking about. You, the skill to observe correction, it's not just going to come necessarily and announce itself in your face. You know, suppose that we were on a field trip in botany, and I'm your botany teacher, and we go out and we take a walk in the woods, and you're in a first year in botany, and you know, you might recognize a few plants, or when we stand by a tree, you might be able to look at that tree and say what species it is, and say something about the behavior of that tree. But just imagine what the botanical teacher is seeing as you walk through these fields of plants and flowers, because the botanical teacher has the skill to observe things. You don't observe them, even though they're right in front of your eyes. You see the difference?
Yes.
So correction is happening right in front of your eyes, but you have to learn how to observe it. And my guideline for that is, look at those events. Don't get caught in the muddiness. You know, the problem with all the exposure and pointing out the fraud and calling the Illuminati on their agenda is that exposing a lie is not the same as seeing the truth.
Good point.
So there's a lot of exposure of the lie and the fraud, but where is the truth? It's not the same thing. So that is why I gave the guideline to the GNE crew in March. And I said, look at events and ask, does this event give advantage to truth? Does the advantage go to truth in this event? So I'll give you an example of a development that I consider to meet that criterion, okay?
Mm-hmm.
I have been passionately concerned, I think as any feeling, decent human being is, about the fact of institutionalized pedophilia in our world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not just talking about child abuse in the family, you know, maybe a young girl gets sexually molested by her uncle. I mean, it happens all the time. I'm talking about institutionalized child abuse, and probably murder and torture among the high-ranking psychopaths in government and things like that.
Yes.
This is an absolute horror of human society that must be lanced. And all, when the pus breaks, it's going to be pretty ugly. but the pus has to break. You have to lance the wound. Would you agree?
Yes. No argument.
Okay. Well, right. So recently, so I looked for this to happen. In fact, I've said that there are two events that I think will be the signal of in human society globally that will prove that correction is underway as a massive social shift. One of them is the exposure, the real exposure and the break-open of institutional
Sorry,
pedophilia.
you're breaking up a lot now at the moment for some reason right now.
I am?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, I just kind of repeated myself.
Okay.
Let me start again. Recently, someone sent me an article that says, from the UK, that says that there is kind of like a chat line or closed Facebook group of retired police authorities in the UK. And someone got on that group somehow or got access. And they found out that these retired officers, detectives, policemen and women are talking about the evidence in the case that they had for institutionalized pedophilia and how it was constantly suppressed by the government.
Huh.
So this is like what you could say a whole chat room of whistleblowers.
Yeah.
Who are not only attesting from their professional experience that they were on the case of institutionalized pedophilia. They were on the case, man. They had the evidence. They had the names. They're also attesting to the fact that they were impeded and suppressed in bringing forth their investigation. Now, that is an example of correction. That is an example of an event where the advantage is going to the truth.
It's a subject
And when
that has
that truth,
gained media attention and
that's right,
been highlighted quite a lot
and,
in recent months.
and will more and more. And when the truth about that breaks, that will be a major event in correction. One of the two major events I see coming up in correction is that. And it's boiling over. How do they keep the lid on that pot of burning pus? I don't know. I don't know how they do it. It's boiling over, isn't it? Boiling over all the time.
Yeah, it is at the moment. Yeah, for sure.
And I'm not talking about Jimmy Savile, who's a horrible, gruesome person. Just look at pictures of him, of somebody dead who did this all 20 or 30 years ago. I'm talking about people in government who are doing it right now.
Yeah, we are.
So that's a big breakthrough for correction coming our way. One of the two big ones.
So I just realised that I didn't really give you the chance to answer the question in terms of Anthropos 11. What are we morphing into?
Okay. What are the signs that the mutation of Anthropos 11 is coming forth from Anthropos 10? Well, I guess I could sit down and try to make an inventory of a list of these signs, okay?
Mm-hmm.
There would be quite a few of them. But since I haven't prepared this talk, I can't do that for you right now, but I'll just tell you what comes to mind.
Okay.
Certainly, first of all, let's say the outstanding sign of that mutation into Anthropos 11 is that human animals, I call them animals, I don't like the term human beings, the human animals, that's people like you and I, will start to manifest deliberately occult powers,
Mm-hmm.
paranormal faculties, telepathy, action at a distance, clairvoyance, clairaudience. In other words, these capacities, which were designed into the human genome by Sophia and Thelete, will suddenly come forth, manifesting in a powerful and flagrant manner.
We come online as intended, as we
There you
originally
go.
intended.
I love your language. We come online, full-blown faculties as intended, and we start to use these faculties to fight off the enemies of life and the psychopaths who are running society.
Well, that leads in nicely to the Kalika War Party,
Doesn't it?
doesn't it? Now, I remember when I first discovered many years ago that how the world works in terms of there is a very small population of the planet who are controlling things, and what their agenda is. And I remember being somewhat young and naive at the time and thinking, well, why hasn't someone just taken them all out? We know who they are. We know what their names are. Why hasn't there been a team of snipers deployed to take them out? And but over recent years, that changed to be one of embracing what we came to call our partners in contrast. However, a recent situation that I was in, a very uncomfortable one with someone I cared a lot about, I had to confront them on their behaviour. And their excuse, I will say, for their behaviour was that they were ridding the world of monsters. And I said, you do not rid the world of monsters by becoming one. So on the one hand, when I read about the Kalika War Party, I thought, yeah, you know what? Why not? But on the other hand, it was like, can we rid the world of psychopaths by not behaving psychopathically, but tapping into an aspect of ourselves in order to do that job? You know what I'm saying? Does it serve you to lower yourself, I guess is what I'm saying. But so tell me, what is the Kalika Party and what's its objective?
Say that.
Sorry, say that again? You cut out. Oh, I've lost you, John.
Okay.
You're
Not
back.
surprising. Am I back?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Before I describe the party, can I respond to what you just said?
Yes.
Because
somebody doesn't want us talking about this. I've lost you again.
it's a hot topic.
There you are. You're back.
Okay. What do you mean by becoming a monster?
In the situation I was in?
Well, in any way, answer it in any way you can, because I don't know what you mean by if you fight monsters, you might become a monster. What do you mean?
Well, in this instance, the person was behaving exactly in the way they were pertaining to be trying to rid the world of. A situation, as we were talking about with pedophilia. You don't rid the world of pedophilia by being a pedophile. You don't rid the world of
certainly
those.
not.
No. And
no.
Do you rid the world of murderers by becoming a murderer?
Yes, you do.
Okay.
You can, in certain instances. The premise of the Kalika War Party, which was just announced a week or so ago, is the revival of the warrior spirit in humanity. And the premise of the Kalika War Party is a challenge. It's an invitation. Can I put it in the form of an invitation?
Mm-hmm.
I invite you to consider how you might use the force of rage that you feel towards psychopaths and the social evil in this world. How you might use the force of rage and the murderous rage you feel and direct it in a lucid and sober manner toward the correct targets. Now, that's not psychopathy.
I understand the distinction.
Yeah, that's not behaving like the people that you want to take out. That is behaving like a warrior. See, one of the great achievements of patriarchy, which is now in its death throes, I'm happy to say I think I delivered the coup de grace to patriarchy with my book, Not in His Image. But one of the great achievements of patriarchy, which goes hand in hand with the achievements of religion, is that it has castrated the warrior spirit of the human animal, both male and female. It had to do so. The archontic system needed to destroy the warrior spirit, the warrior ethic in people in order to get where it has gotten today. So the psychopaths running the world today could not be possible without the suppression and destruction of that pure warrior spirit, which is part of humanity. It's at the heart of your humanity. And we were designed, divinely designed, to excel in violence. That's a statement.
We were divinely designed.
The opportunity to excel.
You're cutting out again.
Excel. Okay.
Okay.
Are you going to
No, definitely losing you.
Yeah, well, that's...
Let's leave this subject for the moment and come back to it, see what happens.
Before we conclude.
Okay, I think I've got you back. Living within the Sophianic myth.
Right.
A day in the life of John Lash. What does it look like to live with this knowledge, to live within this myth?
Well, the outstanding consistent feature in the life of John Lash is a sense of awe.
Mm-hmm.
There's a continuing sense of awe, and there is a sense of humility that comes with surrendering my life into the beauty of this planet. That's how I live. And so no matter what I do every day, whether it be mundane things like taking care of my house, my cars, doing housework, feeding my cats, or whether I'm doing shamanic activities and rituals out in the mountains, it all happens against the background of one single sensation. And that is the sensation that I am living on a planet and that her power is directly available to me at any moment. The power of the entire planet. That's how I live.
Nice.
Now, I'd like, if it's coming across well, I'd like to say something here and really speak to the hearts and minds and imaginations of people listening.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that I really want to say out of love, my love as a teacher for the people who are willing to listen to me. Let me tell you something wonderful that you may not have heard before. When you become co-active with the planet, you enter a power-sharing arrangement with Sophia. There is your power as a single human person, and there is her power as a planet, okay? The person and the planet. The person you are and the planet you're living on. And when you join those in a power-sharing process, that is called Planetary Tantra. And I can tell you something about the experience of Planetary Tantra because I'm in it. with other people as well that you might find really amazing. But I assure you that this is true. When you join your personal power with her power, the power of the planet, she gives you all of it. She gives you access to all her power. Try to imagine that. You don't just get a piece of her action, you get all of her action. And then you see if you can handle it.
So how does one
And
do
that's
that?
you handle it by practicing Planetary Tantra, which contains the instructions for interactivity with the Aeon Sophia. She gave her instructions to interact with her. And they're very simple instructions. She gave them in what I call the Terma of Gaia Awakening. It's simply a kit of instructions. And if you follow those instructions, then you can handle the awesome situation in which she gives you all her power.
Which of your websites can people find that information on?
You go to metahistory.org.
Metahistory.org.
And on the front page, the landing page, you see a menu bar with 13 buttons. And under that menu bar, you see a banner that says Planetary Tantra.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a kind of Australian Aborigine painting motif behind it. You click on that banner and you go to Planetary Tantra, which is a subsection of metahistory.org. And there you have a site guide which gives you an explanation. What is Planetary Tantra? How to practice Planetary Tantra? What are the components of Planetary Tantra? What is the Terma of Gaia Awakening? And it's all there. And it's simple. Believe me, it's really simple.
Okay, I seem to have you back quite clearly. So let's see if we can go back to the Kalika War Party for a minute and then finish off with the mystery schools that you have planned as well.
All right. Right.
So
what is the Kalika War Party?
Mm-hmm.
Well, go to kalikawarparty.org. There you'll see the manifesto of the party.
Mm-hmm.
Manifesto. There you'll see what I call the protocols. It's a word I made up for protocols. Protocols are what you need to know to be cool with the party, you know?
Okay.
Because it's a warrior party, and warriors have a code of honor, and they make various agreements with each other. And it's important to know these agreements to go and join the Kalika War Party. Then there's a section called the Thunderbird Formation, and that explains the icon of the Kalika Warriors, which is the Thunderbird with 18 points on its body. 17 of those points are the bands, specific bands of the Kalika War Party, and the 18th point is Gaia Sophia herself in her current form, in her current expression that is available to humanity. So it's quite a big picture. You can go look at the Thunderbird Formation, read about the different bands and their assignments, and you might want to place yourself in one of those bands. And I have just sketched out what the assignments of the bands are. There is not a complete and definitive definition, because the Kalika War Party is constantly in formation as people select themselves into it, depending on which mission they want to undertake.
So my next question about this would be, I take it the stated objective of the you say Kalika War Party?
Kalika, yes.
Kalika.
Yes.
Is to rid the planet of psychopaths.
And enemies of life, yes. To eliminate them. To terminate them. That's right.
Now, as a solution, did this also come out of the Gnostic text?
Yes, it did, in a way. Or first say it came out of the Gnostic situation. It's a remedy for something that the Gnostics faced that they were not prepared to handle.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go back to that story I told about the beginning of the Christian era. Remember that the Gnostic teachers in the mystery schools were poised to bring forth to humanity a way to identify itself free of the Messiah complex. Because the Messiah complex, which also purports to present an ideal of humanity, Jesus/Christ or whatever, is completely toxic and pathological and is in fact an instrument of psychopaths and murderers. So they weren't able to present their solution to the generic view of humanity that they wanted to teach us so we would know who we are. The reason why is because they were viciously and violently assaulted and they had no warrior class to protect them. So today, the Kalika War Party presents a warrior class. You want to join a warrior class? You're free to join. That's the Kalika War Party. It's a warrior class in the protection of humanity, all living species, and the earth, with the intention of terminating those who are the enemies of life.
I'm sorry. I don't have any objection to it as such. I'm feeling into it, and it's just a completely different stance to the one I've been in for the last couple of years. But that's okay because I'm questioning everything about my stance over the last couple of years.
Well, while you're questioning things, yeah, might I make a little suggestion?
Yeah.
Why don't you ask, how are we going to get beyond exposing to opposing?
There's a electromagnetic, perhaps, is one way of describing it, an energetic that, and Sophie's correction explains this in one way for me, that no longer, we're moving further and further away from their activity being supported.
Well, that is true.
To it being, I mean, we do have, and we have had for the last couple of years, people in banking, people in finance, people in government, just suiciding, being suicided, resigning en masse in unprecedented numbers, taking themselves out in one way or another.
Yes, and the system infighting them. Yes,
sorry,
indeed.
Didn't catch that at all.
Good. People in the system taking up people.
Yes.
They're panicking, killing each other.
Now, whether that's, the psychopaths fighting amongst themselves, or whether that's, humans, true human beings with compassion and empathy for the rest of the planet, cleaning things up, I don't know, and I don't necessarily care. The end result is positive for the planet. So I guess, yeah, I do feel that to a certain extent that the energetics are absolutely moving away from allowing this activity to continue. Now, that may well be a very long, slow process of a couple of hundred years.
Well, it can't be. This is the problem. It can't be a long, slow process. That's the problem. It has to be fast. It's not going to happen at all. You see, it's great that the system is weakening, that it's falling apart, and that people at large are withdrawing consent. It's fabulous. That itself is a sign of correction. But it's not enough. It's not enough. Because you see, they're not going to go out without a fight. Power never cedes itself without a fight.
Okay.
And so they need to be taken out while they're weak, while their system is weakening, is the moment to attack. I've been waiting for you to introduce the Kalika Party.
You've been waiting for what, sorry?
When their system is obviously weakening, is the moment to attack them, not just sit back and wait for it to collapse. No, no, no.
Wait for them to wither in a long, slow, painful death.
No, no, no. no. This is attack time. This is the moment to attack. And attacking the enemies of life is part of humanity's responsibility in her correction. It's a big part of it.
Well, actually,
Recovering. Yeah.
another theme that's come up for me personally a lot lately is questioning all of these spiritual New Age memes. And one is that if you feel anger or you express violence, or then you're not in your heart, and it's not love and light, and blah blah blah. And we don't feed anything. We don't give any energy to anything that's negative because it just feeds it. All of these spiritual memes. And even on a radio show recently, I said, it goes back as far as the Bible. What it does is create complete apathy.
Yeah,
because
and impotence.
People now are looking at the world events and just saying, well, it was prophesied in the Bible, so we're not going to do anything because it's God's work, it's God's will. We're not going to stop the violence that's happening in Gaza, or the stuff that's happening in the Ukraine or anywhere else in the world, because this is the end times and this is part of God's plan. So we're just going to stand back and watch.
Yeah, well, you know what Kali says? Either you are party to my supernatural magic, or you are rubble. And these people are rubble. These pacifists, these people who think in that way, these New Age apologists who dismiss any kind of violence as feeding the negative, are not only deluded fools, but they are rubble. They are wasted as human beings. They're gone. They're already gone. Their apocalypse doesn't have to come. They're already gone. Their humanity has already been lost. I regard those people with contempt.
Telling it like it is. Okay, the mystery schools. You want to bring back?
You want to conclude with mystery schools?
Yeah, I think so. We haven't talked much about them. You mentioned slightly that the old mystic schools of the Gnostics, which I assume is what you're referring to bringing back.
Wait, hold on. Who said I wanted to bring back the mystery schools? Did I say that?
I thought you did.
No.
Somewhere in your writing?
Said that.
No? Okay. Well, okay. So is there any plans for getting the Gnostic material out in a broader way, that other than through the Metahistory website?
Okay, let me correct myself. It is true that recently in some talks and readings I've posted, I talked about something called the TVM, was the Treasure Valley Mysterium.
The Treasure Valley.
I talked about, Treasure Valley Mysterium.
Mm-hmm.
Treasure Valley. Treasure Valley is where I live most of the time. Now, I said, you're right in a way. I said that insofar as correction, it's possible that a mycelium-like network similar to the mystery schools might reemerge in our time.
Oh, okay.
I did that. Okay?
Yep.
So I apologize for cutting you down there, okay?
That's okay.
Contradicting. Okay?
I'll recover.
However, I need to be, okay, I'm sure you will. Sound like a resilient creature to me. So let me give it to you very briefly and succinctly, okay? First of all, I can tell you that unless there is a warrior class to oppose, defeat, and eliminate the psychopaths, the world will not be safe for these mystery schools to emerge.
Yeah, that's probably very true.
So let's get the cart and the horse in the right order here.
Mm-hmm.
We have to make a world, or certain places in the world, safe for the mystery schools to emerge. Now I'll give you the real prize of the jackpot on that subject. however these mystery schools might reappear, whoever might join them, wherever they might arise in little communities here and there in the southern and northern hemispheres. The one thing that all these revived schools require to be real and genuine is the telistic method of the Gnostics. The telistic method of the Gnostics is what would be practiced in these schools. They're not New Age, free-for-all kindergartens of pretending. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
They're hardcore shamanic schools protected by a hardcore warrior class that is willing to kill either by magic or other ways as well. This is the hardcore reality that I see. So I do dream of this, and I do deeply wish that people would come together, and I can even tell them how to do it. There are very specific ways to construct a mystery cell. It multiplies like a daughter cell in mitosis. 2, 4, 8, 16.
Mm-hmm.
I could direct people to recreate a mystery cell. I know exactly how to do it. I could do that. And I am doing it, in fact, with some people right now. But I can assure you that the world first has to be made safe for such a phenomenon to occur in her correction. And in particular, and get this, because this is the punchline, it has to be made safe for the ritual use of psychoactive plants, allow ecstatics into the power of the earth and entry into the presence of her light.
Well, there are very small pockets on the planet where it is safe to do so. Already.
I do believe there are. I do believe there are, and I do believe may multiply as the mutation to Anthropos 11 proceeds. Because such pockets and such safe environments where psychoactive ritual shamanism can be practiced are the places that would give optimal chance for this mutation, and we would grow a new humanity inside our skins, an empowered humanity of warriors, lovers, shamans.
John?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah,
Well, thank you. You're very welcome.
It's been an amazing couple of days,
Hasn't it?
hasn't it?
Yeah. I could barely sleep after we talked. I don't think I'm going to be able to sleep again. It's like 2:30 now. I'll probably be out for the next 12 hours. You've got some good energy going here. We've got some juice.
Yeah, it's really nice.
Yeah. One other thing, just let me add, I wouldn't want to forget it. Another sign of correction is that men and women come together in new ways. You know, we'll get over the gender wars. Feminism fades into a nasty memory and disappears like a bubble. The feminist movement and all the damage it has done to male-female relations just dies flat on its face. And men and women come together as warriors and equals. We are equals. We're not the same. We're very different. But we're equals in this war. We're equals in the line of battle and the line of beauty.
I see a lot of barriers coming down.
Yes, I do too.
When it comes to relationships.
Indeed.
Well, thank you so much.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you, and let's see if we connect again sometime in the coming year.
I have a feeling we will, because I have a feeling there's going to be a lot of questions come out of this.
Excellent. We can follow up on the questions that come to you, and we can go more into the Kalika War Party, if that is appropriate. That's what I'd like to do, because
Yeah. Okay. I'd like to do that too. I'm going to read more on that subject. And we'll talk soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.